Good evening, happy Halloween, and welcome to the New Hampshire debates. I'm Mike Nikitas from NECN. Joining us tonight are the four candidates for governor of New Hampshire: Republican and former U.S. Senator Gordon Humphrey, Independent State Senator Mary Brown, Democratic incumbent Governor Jeanne Shaheen, and Libertarian John Babiarz. First, a word about the format. Tonight's debate is divided into two parts. During our first half hour, a panel of journalists will question the candidates. They are Allison McNair from New Hampshire Public Television and Tom Fahey of the Union Leader. Following a quick 2-minute break at the bottom of the hour, the candidates will have an opportunity to question each other. This segment will also include videotaped questions from citizens. We'll begin with the opening statements, and the order was determined by a random drawing ahead of time. Mr. Humphrey, you have 1 minute for your opening statement, and good evening to all of you.
Thank you. Good evening to you and to my colleagues. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This election is about our children, your children and my children. And for that reason, I want to make two very solemn pledges. First, I'm going to make our schools even better. I'll fund them as generously as I can, and I'll increase that funding as the economy expands. Promise two is that I will veto any income tax. I'm just utterly determined to ensure that this state is not saddled with an income tax. Governor Shaheen regards that pledge as a gimmick, and yet she took that very pledge 2 years ago and 4 years ago. I urge her tonight to join me in taking that pledge. Tonight you will certainly hear a lot about the past from Governor Shaheen because she has rather few plans for the future. Instead, she has huge campaign spending promises that add up to one thing: an income tax on seniors, on our working people, and worst of all, on the future income of our children. Thus, I pledge to you better schools, generous funding, and no income tax.
Senator Brown, you're next. You have a minute for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate being invited to this forum tonight. I'm State Senator Mary Brown, and I am running as an independent candidate for governor. New Hampshire faces the biggest challenge our legislatures had to deal with in the last century. It's extremely important that we do it right. I have a long-term plan, not just a short 2-year fix-it-up plan, but a long-term plan to fund public schools here in New Hampshire. I will repeal the statewide property tax and several other taxes and replace them with a 4% constitutionally capped income tax dedicated to funding our public schools. We're bumping along on the information superhighway with a horse and buggy tax designed 200 years ago. We need to fund 21st century schools with a 21st century tax.
Thank you, and Governor Shaheen, you have a minute as well for your opening statement.
Good evening. There's a lot at stake in this election, and a clear choice between moving forward or slipping back, between leadership that gets results and extremism that's out of touch with New Hampshire families. I want to keep New Hampshire moving forward. I've worked hard to build our strong economy. 50,000 new jobs, the highest wages ever, lower electric rates. I'll keep our economy strong, and that means making sure all our kids get a good education. I've expanded public kindergarten, helped our families save for college. I'm working for higher standards and more accountability in our schools. School funding is our greatest challenge. I'll solve that problem in a way that's good for our kids and our economy, and that keeps our taxes the lowest in New England. And I'll keep fighting to expand health insurance for our children and lower prescription drug prices for our seniors. I offer leadership that gets results. I hope I'll have your support next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Babiarz, you have a minute for your opening statement.
I'm John Babiarz. English is my second language because I'm the son of Polish immigrants. My mother was imprisoned in a Nazi work camp. My father exiled to Siberia by the communists. I've seen the fear of tyranny from government in their eyes, and I feel it in my heart. Tonight, we're going to see the difference between big government and small government. We're going to see how government that has more control over your life, over your family, is not right. In fact, I'm going to show the stark difference between myself and the other candidates, that they're for bigger government and I'm for smaller government. They want more control of your family and your family's life. I don't want to control your family's life. They want to control your money. I don't want any of your money. But you're asking, John, how can you win? Well, I can guarantee you this, that my opponents, if you vote for them, I can guarantee in 2 years they're going to be bigger government, more intrusive government, and more expensive government. I ask you for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Babiarz, and thanks to all of you. And now we turn to our panel of journalists. The candidate receiving the question will have 1 minute to answer, followed by a 30-second response from your opponents. Allison, you have the first question, and it goes to Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you very much, Mike. As Senator, when it comes to economic prosperity in New Hampshire, some people might say that we really are two separate entities. The reason for saying that is the North Country does not have access to the high-speed internet. It keeps companies from locating there. It keeps people from moving there to telecommute. If you were to be elected governor, would you favor government support of giving the North Country access to high-speed internet?
Allison, I'd swear you've been reading my speeches, because I've said exactly the same thing. First, with respect to the entire state, what makes our economy strong, what draws in capital and entrepreneurs and keeps them here to the benefit of our children in terms of new and exciting jobs, are low taxes. There'll be no income tax if I'm governor. I make you that pledge, and it's not a gimmick. It's a solemn pledge. I make it for our children, and I'll keep it for our children. To address your question, yes, I'm very involved in and understand high tech. There's a bottleneck in our state in terms of economic development for the North Country, the Monadnock region, in fact, all of the rural parts of our state. When I'm governor, I'm going to push ahead on the building out of the infrastructure so that we can provide high-speed internet access to all of our towns. There isn't a modern business in this state that will move into the rural part of our state if it relies on high-speed data transmission, because that capacity is not there today. I'll fix it. I'm going to create a bonded fund. It will be operated on a business-like basis, and we'll get that infrastructure built.
Senator Brown, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Of course, the internet is extremely important in the future economy of our state, and we need to make sure everybody in the state has access to high-speed internet. Whatever that takes, the North Country is isolated in a number of ways, and that's one area that we need to work on. We also need to work on transportation items, making sure people can get there and get back and forth from the North Country. So absolutely, I would work to do that.
Governor Shaheen, you have 30 seconds as well.
I've already been working to try and increase access to high speed to the internet in the North Country and in the western part of the state. We have a new effort that we're working on with economic development groups in both of those areas to aggregate demand for services. We're building on a model that we've looked at in Berkshire County, Massachusetts. It's provided significant savings to people and has worked to bring in investors who can put in that infrastructure so that companies get access to the internet.
And Mr. Babiarz.
I am an internet service provider. 5 years ago, I brought internet to my rural area. I did it without the government help. I went and did it because I saw a need for myself, for my business. So I installed it there, and in turn, I got other businesses online to provide that. We don't have to wait for government for a solution. We can provide it now. We have industry, we just need to encourage them. The infrastructure is somewhat in place, but we need to encourage the major telecoms to come in and build up the infrastructure. And that will only happen with more bigger businesses moving in.
Tom Fahey of the Union Leader, you have the next question. It goes to Senator Brown.
Thank you. Senator Brown, hi. You stated repeatedly during your candidacy that the one thing that drove you to run for governor was the need for an income tax. The legislature would have to pass such a tax before it got to you. We'll have a new legislature, we'll have a new Senate. An income tax might not get through. What would you do if it didn't get through? What other priorities would you put in place?
Well, first of all, it did pass last time, and I think there are folks, although some of them are gone, I admit, I think there are folks who want to reform our tax structure. It's not simply putting in an income tax, but it's also a tax reform package. And I believe as an independent, I can bring enough folks together to do that, because I'm basically saying to them, I will take the heat, the political heat for that. You'll get off the hook, but you got to do it right. Now, if I fail, we're no worse off than we are right now. We're looking at the very same options that these folks are talking about. And so I think we owe it to the state. It's time to do it. We shouldn't miss the window of opportunity to do it right. That's why I'm running.
Governor?
Thank you. My goal is to solve the school funding challenge. I'm going to do that in a way that's good for our economy, that's good for our kids, and that keeps our taxes the lowest in New England. But this is a challenge that we must solve. It's critical to the future of New Hampshire. I'm going to work with the legislature, look at the options that we have for solving it, and I'm going to get school funding solved.
Mr. Babiarz.
The legislative branch passed the bill under duress, and that's a statewide property tax. No thorough thought was put out. They just were working under a deadline. We need to put that deadline behind us. We need to make sure it doesn't occur a legislative branch under duress. So what we have to do is really look at the total options. And I'm against an income tax, I'm against the sales tax, I'm even against the broad-based tax for property that we have now.
Mr. Humphrey, you have 30 seconds.
Well, we've been going around in circles on school funding now for 4 years. The main reason is that Governor Shaheen has provided rather poor leadership to the legislature. We have two choices. We can't spend money we don't have, so either we live on a budget or we enact new taxes. I'm going to do my utmost to persuade the legislature to pass an education funding program that lives within our budget. I can't guarantee the legislature, Tom, nor can any one of us. I can't guarantee the legislature will follow my lead in every occasion, but I can guarantee you I will lead.
All right, Allison, you have the next question. It goes to the governor.
Good evening, Governor. You appointed a panel of experts, your Blue Ribbon Commission, to look at various ways that the state of New Hampshire can pay for education. If you are reelected, and if this commission comes to you after extensive study and says the best way for New Hampshire to pay for education is through an income tax, if that's the case, will you support an income tax for New Hampshire?
You know, the charge to the commission is to look at the choices that we have for solving school funding and tell us what the advantages and disadvantages to those choices are. It's going to be up to me as governor and the legislature to then decide what's the best plan for this state. But we need the hard facts, we need the economic analysis, we need the independent study that we haven't had as we have looked at solving school funding in the past. I'm going to solve school funding. I've got a 5-part test for how we do that. We've got to have a reliable source of funding. It needs to be something that's not going to harm the economy. We need to make sure that we lower the statewide property tax, that we keep our taxes the lowest in New England, and that ultimately we make sure that we improve our schools, because that's what this challenge is all about. Now, we can do that, and we must do that, because the future of New Hampshire depends on having a skilled workforce that can take on the jobs of the future.
Mr. Babiarz, you have 30 seconds.
Claremont was a problem. It was a problem many years in the making. But to have a commission now, I think, is a little bit too late. First of all, the governor was there in the Senate and has been governor for 4 years. The commission, if she was going to have a commission, should have been started earlier, because we know this train wreck was coming. But unfortunately, the commission will not give its answers until after the election. I think we have a problem here.
Mr. Humphrey.
It is odd that Governor Shaheen has been in Concord 10 years now, 6 years as a state senator, 4 years as governor, and in the 11th hour, up comes this Blue Ribbon Commission, which enables the governor to put the issue over until 2 months after the election. That's not leadership. That's hiding, if you ask me. Viewers may not agree with them, every one of them agree with me, but I'm against an income tax. I don't need a commission to tell me that. I'm also against the 25% capital gains tax it would take to fund the governor's program, and the 8% sales tax.
Senator.
Well, I've been there, and we've had 3 years of hearings, of expert witnesses, of all kinds of folks to tell us what will happen under certain scenarios. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the property tax is exhausted. It can no longer be used to grow, to fund public schools. It isn't sensitive to your income. It's an unfair tax. That's why I am proposing a complete tax reform package. That's why it passed in the Senate and in the House last time, and that's what we need to do.
All right, new question from Tom, and it goes to Mr. Babiarz first. You have a minute.
Thank you. We've had a pretty excruciating summer with impeachment proceedings and investigations of the state Supreme Court. There are a lot of measures that would reform the court coming up in the legislature next year. What do you think ought to be done to reform the court, to restore the confidence that the public should have in it? What would you do?
Sure. I have 4 items. First of all, we need to repeal 72A and 73A of the Constitution, which was passed in 1966 and 1978, which gave the Supreme Court the administrative court powers. We need to have the Judicial Conduct Committee and the Professional Conduct Committee underneath the legislative branch and not under the court. Finally, we need to get rid of the unified bar so that lawyers that have ethics problem can go open to the public as opposed to being in fear of losing their license if they point out any discrepancies in the court.
Mr. Humphrey, you have 30 seconds.
That's a big subject for 30 seconds. First and foremost, solid judicial appointments. There'll be no appointments of old family friends of Gordon Humphrey. None of this old boy network. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a list of people who want to serve on the bench. Secondly, as Mr. Babiarz has pointed out, we need to make the Judicial Oversight Committee truly independent. Third, most important, we need to limit the terms that members may serve on the Supreme Court. We don't elect the governor to a single term of 30 years, yet we put people on the court for 30, 35 years. One single term of 10 years, I think, would be just right.
Senator Brown.
There are a number of things that we need to do. One thing we need to not do is make it a personal vendetta against any of the judges. I like the Governor's Selection Committee. That's a really good idea. We need to divide the adjudicative administrative function of the Chief Justice. We need to allow for personal leaves of absence when judges have a problem. We need to have regular compliance audits. We need to separate the Judicial Conduct Committee, and we need to change the retirement system so judges are part of the state system.
Governor Shaheen.
Thank you. I think it's very important that we work to restore public confidence in the court. That's why I created a Judicial Selection Commission to make sure that there's no perception that judges are being appointed because of their political connections. I'm very disappointed that my opponent, Gordon Humphrey, has said he will not abide by that Judicial Selection Commission if he's elected governor. I think we also need to make sure that the Judicial Conduct Committee that looks at allegations of misconduct is an independent body.
All right, at this time, we're going to reverse the order, shake things up a little bit, keep it fresh. Allison McNair, you have the question for Mr. Babiarz.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Babiarz, as a Libertarian candidate, the Libertarian Party is known for saying less government is better government. Here in New England, and specifically here in New Hampshire, too, we're anticipating some very high costs as far as home heating prices go this winter. Do you favor government support for those people who have a tough time paying their heating bills? And as governor, what would you do to help ease the high cost of fuel?
The problem is government got involved in the first place through its energy policies that the federal government would not allow any more drilling. But that's besides the point. We have private companies that have come to aid. For example, I'm a member of New Hampshire Electric Co-op, where they have a fund for people that can't pay their bills, and they provide it that way. We need to encourage more of that kind of activity. But the last thing we need to do is have the state of New Hampshire involved in the oil holding program, because the maintenance of all the tanks, all the other stuff, that's best handled by the industry. And we don't want the government to be burdened with all the regulatory requirements to hold all this oil, because the government is not good in speculation of oil prices to keep the prices at the reasonable cost.
Mr. Humphrey, your response.
Well, the shortage and the high cost of fuels should have been anticipated. Had I been governor these last 4 years, I'd have been working very actively in Washington to create a Northeast heating oil reserve located physically in this part of the country. That idea is just beginning to get off the ground, rather tardily, I would say. I would also say this, that I know how Washington works. I was a United States Senator for 12 years. I was a legislator in Concord for 2 years. I know how those cities work. I'll do my very best to get us enough money to help low-income persons heat and pay for their energy bills during the winter.
Senator Brown.
As a senator, I hear from constituents, especially elderly folks, who have to choose routinely between heating their home, buying their prescriptions, paying for food, and paying their property taxes. This is a real problem for folks, and we need to make sure that they have fuel assistance if they need it this winter. We also need to do some preventive things in the future. We need to look at rewarding efficiency, helping folks make their homes more efficient so they don't need as much heating oil, and to conserve.
And Governor Shaheen, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. I've worked very hard to try and address the high costs of fuel and to make sure it's available to people who need it. Because I pressured Washington, we've seen the creation of a Northeast Heating Oil Reserve. It's up and running now. We've seen the President tap the strategic oil reserves. Because of the changes that I made at the Governor's Energy Office, we were the first state in New England last winter that requested additional fuel assistance monies, and we got them for the people of this state.
All right. Next question is from Tom Fahey of the Union Leader, and it goes to the Governor.
Mr. Governor, wanted to take up the issue of housing for a minute. There has been a report in the past month that shows that the cost of housing, especially rental housing, is getting further and further out of the reach of low-wage workers, low-income families. What kind of changes are you working on to solve that problem, and how do you do it without passing all the burden onto cities?
Well, affordable housing is a real issue. If we're going to keep our economy strong, we have to make sure we have enough housing for the people of this state. So I've worked very hard with the Housing Finance Authority. They're building an additional 200 units of affordable housing this year. We've also worked with Fannie Mae, the big lender at the national level, and they're coming into this state. They're putting in their Northeast office in New Hampshire. They've made available $3 billion over the next 5 years for low-interest loans for people. We've doubled the amount of rental deposits available for people because having those deposits is often an issue for people. And we've also made sure that there's a pilot program to help welfare recipients in Manchester have the deposits they need for rental housing. I understand that making sure that people have safe, affordable, comfortable housing is critical to making sure that they're comfortable in their lives.
Mr. Babiarz, you have 30 seconds.
Housing is a function of supply and demand. The supply is restricted because of zoning ordinances or other state regulations or local regulations that prohibit builders from expanding, from developing, to create more housing for both the poor and the working class. And what we need to make sure is that government doesn't restrict the ability of people to develop areas so that people can have affordable housing.
Mr. Humphrey.
Tom, there's a wonderful agency of government. I don't often use that adjective in connection with government, but there's a wonderful agency here in our state, the governor referred to it, called the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Its purpose literally is to help make financing available for the building of low-income rental units and indeed units for sale. They're handicapped at present because their bonding level is only $75 million, and they're always bumping up against that bonding limit. I'll get that limit raised. It needs to be raised with the IRS in Washington, and I'll get the job done.
Senator Brown.
A big factor in the cost of housing is property taxes, and I am going to repeal the statewide property tax and reduce the reliance on property taxes for future funding of government, especially for our schools. We also need to work to ensure proper zoning and help communities that allow for the expansion of housing, public housing and low-cost housing. Help them with the cost they incur to do that.
New question from Allison McNair of New Hampshire Public TV, and it goes to Senator Brown once again.
Senator Brown, good evening. You mentioned this just a moment ago about statewide property taxes, but we do have communities, otherwise known as donor towns, who feel that they are paying more than their fair share for funding education here in New Hampshire. What's your position on that?
Well, I, of course, eliminate donor towns because I repeal the statewide property tax. What this tax does is it pits town against town. Some of it's real and some of it's just perceived because we're sending money to the state. We watch what other communities are doing and we think, well, gee, that's our money. We've created a monster here with the statewide property tax. Assessments are going to go up. The rates are going to go up. We have accelerated the rate of increase for property taxes on a tax base that's already used up. We just cannot continue to go to it. So my position is repeal the statewide property tax, make it a fair tax based on income, which is what our founders intended. If you look into the Constitution 200 years ago, property taxes were income taxes. So I want to return us to a fair and equitable tax for everyone.
Governor Shaheen, you have 30 seconds.
Yes. I've taken off the table a higher statewide property tax because I recognize it has an impact on people on fixed incomes and people in those donor communities. That's the only option that my opponent, Gordon Humphrey, has left on the table. Because he's going to reduce local aid to education by over $100 million, he's going to increase property taxes at the local level. He's also, because his numbers don't add up, he's going to increase the statewide property tax because he doesn't have enough money to do the programs that we need to do in state government.
And Mr. Babiarz.
We need to eliminate the broad-based tax, any broad-based tax, including the statewide property tax. And the reason for that is anytime you have a broad-based tax, the spending will increase because people have a sense that the money is coming from heaven. And it's not. It's coming from other towns. And so what happens is spending currently has accelerated at a high rate that It's not fair for the donor communities, and it's going to hurt the receiver communities in the long run because spending is out of control.
And Mr. Humphrey.
Well, I believe the question was about donor towns. I'm not sure Governor Shaheen addressed that important issue. The school funding plan I have on the table, which provides not less than $825 million and does so without an income tax, works beautifully well with or without an income tax. It's freestanding. But with respect to donor towns, I think the idea stinks, frankly. I think it's unfair, and I propose, Tom, to put before the voters at the next general election a constitutional amendment that says something like this: each dollar raised in a town through property tax remains in that town. No more donor towns.
Next question comes from Tom Fahey, and we go right back to Mr. Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. 2 years ago, Republican candidate for governor Jay Lucas put about $1 million of his own money into his campaign for governor. This year, you've put more than that, 1.2 and counting, into this race. Should public office be for people who are wealthy, or would you support some sort of campaign finance reform that would alter this way of funding candidacies?
Tom, my commitment to keeping this state free of an income tax is so great that I was willing to put my own and my wife's money into this campaign. Turns out it was a matter of necessity because more than half of Governor Shaheen's money comes from out of state. In this last period, I actually outraised Governor Shaheen right here in the state, but she raised more than twice as much as me because most of her money comes from out of state. So I don't pretend the situation is perfect, but I believe in the First Amendment right of free speech, and I believe that in the final analysis, in the good sense of the voters. They're going to determine whose ideas are better, whose ideas aren't so good, and I think this issue of how many dollars I put into it or someone else has in the past is almost irrelevant. It's clear, you know, that I'm never going to pay $1 million in income taxes in the state, so my defense of our state against an income tax, for me personally, is a net loss proposition, but I care about the principle, and I care about the fact I don't want my kids paying an income tax.
Senator Brown, it's your response for 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. I have lots to say, but in 30 seconds, let me just say I have a perspective on this. My zeros are at least 3 or 4 less than both of them on how much money I've spent. I'm beginning to think public financing of campaigns makes a lot of sense if you want to get more people involved in the process, people who have something to contribute, who know what they're talking about, but may not have wealthy friends and contributors or a party structure behind them. So, yes, I'm definitely favor finance reform.
Governor Shaheen.
I support campaign finance reform. As a state senator, I supported every bill that came before me. As governor, I've signed every campaign finance reform bill. My opponent, Gordon Humphrey, does not support campaign finance reform, never has in his entire public career. He is trying to buy this election. The fact is, he talks about being able to manage government. Well, he can't even manage his campaign on the campaign spending limit. So why should we ever believe that he'd be able to manage government efficiently?
And Mr. Babiarz.
I'm against the government paying for campaigns. If I don't believe in welfare for corporations, why should we have welfare for politicians? In fact, somebody who spends $1 million to get a $96,000 a year job, they're either really committed or should be committed.
Thank you all. It is time now to take a short break, and when we come back, the candidates will question each other. Don't go away.
The New Hampshire debates are a presentation of New Hampshire Public Television, the Union Leader, and New England Cable News. We continue the New Hampshire debates with candidates for governor.
Welcome back once again, and happy Halloween once again. I'm Mike Nikitas of NECN. We are here tonight with the 4 candidates for governor of New Hampshire: Gordon Humphrey, Mary Brown, Jean Shaheen, and John Babiarz. Now, in this segment, the candidates will question each other, and we ask that you keep your questions to a brief 15 seconds, please, and your answers to 45 seconds. You'll have the ability to ask a follow-up if you'd like, and I also have that ability as well in this segment. All right, we begin with Mr. Humphrey, and your question goes to Senator Brown.
How pleased I am.
Thank you.
To direct a question at my neighbor from Chichester. Senator Brown, you were a state representative for, what, 4 years? and you've been a state senator for 2 years, so you've been on the scene, you've been able to witness firsthand the caliber, the quality of the leadership our governor has offered on this school funding issue. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Oh, okay. I often would think of a word on the school funding issue, AWOL, absent without leave, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but there wasn't a sense of leadership in this problem. There wasn't a sense of vision. Leadership is more than just simply process. It's more than simply understanding and building a consensus. It's having a vision. Where are we going? What is the long-term plan? I have yet to hear a long-term plan from the governor. And I think many of us wished and hoped that that would happen. I think that answers your question.
Well, you have your chance to hear the
more?
long-term plan if you'd like, because you have the next question, and it goes to the governor.
Well, I do have a question for you, Governor. Good evening. As you know, Governor, I have been an ardent opponent of the statewide property tax. And this plan we have is supposedly interim. It's supposed to expire on January 3rd, 2003. Do you feel the statewide property tax is good for New Hampshire? And if not, what do you plan to replace it with?
We passed an interim plan that has moved us forward dramatically on the issue of school funding. We have lowered property taxes for people in 80% of our state. We have dramatically reduced the disparity in what communities are paying for the cost of education. For the first time, communities have been able to choose between whether they wanted to put more money into education or whether they wanted to lower property taxes. I think it's been an excellent start. Now we've got to finish the job. We have to come up with a long-term reliable source of funding. I think it's got to be something that's going to be good for our economy, that's going to keep our taxes the lowest in New England. That's what I'm committed to doing, and I'm committed to solving this problem.
Now your commitment is to ask a question of John Babiarz. Your turn.
Since I've been governor, we've reduced out-of-state sludge from more than 11,000 tons to just over 1,000 tons. Gordon Humphrey has promised to ban all out-of-state sludge. Mr. Babiarz, you're a student of the Constitution. Do you think he can really do that?
He cannot ban sludge like that. Because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, all states must trade equally with each other. The only way to reduce the sludge is to have tighter requirements such that the out-of-state companies cannot meet those requirements.
All right. Mr. Babiarz, your turn to ask Mr. Humphrey a question.
Senator Humphrey, you're for smaller government and local control. How can you be for the Home Rule Amendment?
Well, as a matter of fact, I've changed my mind on that. I've been hearing left and right from hunters. I've been hearing left and right from homeschoolers. And I never posed as an expert on this constitutional amendment, which each of us as voters will find on the ballot when we go into the booth on November 7th. But based on what I've been told by hunters and homeschoolers, I'm not going to vote for it. I don't pose as an expert, but that's the way I'm going to vote.
All right, we changed things up a little bit, and Mr. Humphrey, you have a question for Governor Shaheen.
Yes. Governor, I so much respect Mary Brown. I don't agree with her on an income tax, but I respect her courage and integrity in standing forthright for an income tax. I stand forthrightly opposed to an income tax. You seem to stand forthrightly on both sides of the fence on this, Governor, as on so many other things. Will you not tonight tell us whether you're for an income tax or against an income tax? Will you not join me in pledging to veto an income tax?
No. The people of New Hampshire deserve real answers to this. They don't need pledges or gimmicks. My opponent, Gordon Humphrey, has spent all night talking about taxes, but he's never once talked about the taxes that he's going to raise. He's going to raise local property taxes because he arbitrarily cuts $100 million in local aid to schools. That's not only going to hurt every school and every child in this state, but it's going to put us back in court because it's an unconstitutional plan. It's also going to lead to higher property taxes at the local level. And then because the numbers in his budget proposals don't add up, he's going to be forced to slash services in state government and to raise the rate of the statewide property tax.
All right, if I can just follow up, there are scenarios then you're telling us under which you would support an income tax. If your commission came back to you and said an income tax is something we think we need, you'd support it.
As I've said, my commission is going to tell us the advantages and disadvantages of the various choices that we have for funding education. The option that I've taken off the table is a higher statewide property tax. But I'm committed to solving this problem, and I'm going to do it in a way that's good for our kids, that's good for our economy, and that keeps our taxes the lowest in New England.
Senator Humphrey, any follow-up?
Indeed, yes. I, too, am going to solve the school funding problem for my 2 children, one of whom is still in public school, public grammar school. And here's how I do it. I take that economic growth that we reap through an expanding economy, and I put more of it into education and necessarily relatively less of it into the other part of government. It's a good plan, and it'll work. And I want to make it clear once again, it works without an income tax. It works without a sales tax. It works without a capital gains tax. It's a sound New Hampshire common sense plan.
Well, since that wasn't a follow-up question, I'm going to go back to Governor Shaheen and give her a little more time here.
Thank you. I appreciate that Gordon Humphrey doesn't like what I've had to say about school funding, because he and I have a fundamentally different approach to education. His entire public career in the U.S. Senate and in the state Senate, he's opposed public education. He opposed student loans. He wanted to eliminate all aid to education, even special education. He even opposed school lunches. My entire career, I've supported schools. I want to improve our schools. I've expanded public kindergarten. We've got 98% of the schools in the state wired to the internet. We've increased funding for education. I'm going to solve school funding in a way that's going to be good for our kids. I'm not going to offer some phony solution that's not going to get the job done.
Senator Brown, it's your question. That exchange was between them. You have a question now for Mr. Babiarz.
Yes,
we'll see how creative you can be in working in whatever it is you wanted to say.
Well, let me think here. Doesn't fit this question. Mr. Babiarz, as you know, you and I were excluded from some of the gubernatorial debates this fall, and most notably the WMUR debate last Thursday. What type of campaign reform, laws, or whatever you would like to describe, would you support to promote more democratic and open debates?
First of all, thank you, Mary. I know how hard it is, both you and myself went to get on the ballot. It's not an easy task. What we need is ballot access reform. But more importantly, we need to get the message out. And a TV station has public airwaves, and that public airwaves is a domain of the people, and the station is given license to it. I think they should be required, if they have a debate, to have it open to all candidates that are on the ballot, because it takes hard work to get on the ballot.
And that's why we have you here tonight. And it's good to have you here. All right. We go now to Governor Shaheen, and it's your turn to question Mr. Humphrey.
Senator Humphrey, you've opposed a prescription drug benefit for Medicare. You voted repeatedly to cut Social Security and Medicare. You even opposed Meals on Wheels for seniors when you and I were in the state Senate together. Why should senior citizens trust you to do anything about the high cost of prescription drugs?
Well, Governor, with all due respect to the office, I don't know why any senior would trust a candidate who, like you, has deliberately tried to frighten them. You've mentioned the prescription drug benefit. Yes, I voted against that in Washington. So ultimately, a few months later, did the entire United States Senate, including your pal Ted Kennedy and your other pal Al Gore. Unanimously, they voted against it. Why? Because we simply couldn't afford it without bankrupting the system. Governor, you've run the dirtiest campaign in the history of this state. You really need to take the advice of your hometown paper, the Dover Democrat, and pull your campaign out of the gutter. You don't tell people that, for example, that in 1986 I voted to increase Pell Grants and guaranteed student loans, that I voted to increase special education for handicapped children, that I voted to support school breakfasts and the Women and Infant and Children program. Tell the entire story, Governor.
Governor, would you like to follow up?
If you listen very closely to what he said, you heard that he's not going to do anything to help our senior citizens with the high cost of prescription drugs. The fact is, Senator Humphrey's record is very clear. The people of this state have a right to know what his record is. I'm proud of my record. I've gotten real results for the people of this state on education, on health care, on lower electric rates. The people have a right to know what each of us has done, because that's going to show them what we're going to do as governor.
That one wasn't a question either, but go ahead, Mr. Humphrey.
Governor, labeling is not leadership. Running a smear campaign is beneath the dignity of the office of governor. You frightened older people by telling them that I wanted to phase out Social Security. The whole truth is, I said,
That's what you said.
Phase it out over 50 years, honoring the commitment of every participant, and phasing in a new program in which younger people can invest in the private sector. You turned my words on their head, Governor, and you did it to frighten older people, and I resent it, and I think you owe them an apology.
Governor?
As I said, your record speaks for itself. The people of New Hampshire have a right to know what that record is.
Mr. Babiarz, your turn to ask a question to Senator Brown.
Senator Brown, your income tax plan calls for a constitutional cap. It also calls for a cap on, or actually eliminates state property tax. What caps the educational portion of the education, because local communities can still raise local taxes for education? What prevents that from going up? And that's basically it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Babiarz. I have a cap on the income tax, as you mentioned, a constitutional cap to limit it to no more than 4% and to dedicate it, very important, to dedicate this income tax to public school funding. It provides plenty of money, more than we need to fill this current liability. The local community, as always, John, decides how much they want to spend. I'm not going to tell them what to do, but I do put in a temporary 5 to 10 year cap to constrain the local property tax so that the communities can heal, so that the tax base can begin to expand, and so that we heal the problems we've created by over-relying on property taxes. But in the end, it's up to the local community.
All right, Senator Humphrey, it's your turn now to ask a question to Mr. Babiarz.
John, you and I are devotees of the internet and the economic development potential of the internet. Do you see any material progress? You're an ISP, are you not? An internet service provider. Have you seen any material progress in the last 4 years in expanding the infrastructure such that we might get high-speed internet access into the rural parts of our state?
Yes. In fact, I'm in a rural part of the state now that the initial fiber optics were laid out in the mid-'70s. In fact, I put in a T1 into a rural area in Grafton, and also that the new equipment coming through, it's making it available. The problem is we have a regulatory commission, regulatory tariffs, that makes it difficult for the phone company to put in modern equipment and negotiate what it is to go into that area. We have a rigid structured tariff system that needs to be removed, repealed, or whatever, so that we can work to move this technology faster.
Mr. Humphrey, I somehow get the idea that that wasn't the response you were expecting.
That sounded like a commercial for his business. Well, more power to you. But there is this restrictive regulatory structure that is blocking progress. Ladies and gentlemen, for communities that don't get high-speed internet access, it's going to be like communities that weren't on the railroad line in 1850. They're going to get left behind. Time is of the essence. Mr. Babiarz has confirmed that there's a restrictive regulatory structure that is preventing the expansion of high-speed internet access. I will fix that problem. And we're going to bring economic development to the entire state.
Thanks for that follow-up question. And now, Ms. Brown, you have a question for Mr. Humphrey.
Oh, all right. Senator Humphrey, I can't find my question, but I'll just ask you. Under your plan,
yes,
you intend to keep the state obligation to $825 million. To do that, as you know, you need 13 out of the 24 senators to agree to vote for that. Can you tell us some of the people who are running who will likely support you in that?
Well, I wouldn't want to predict that, but the point you make is perfectly valid and obvious, that a governor is not a dictator. A governor must work cooperatively with members of the legislature. Now, you're you, and I'm me, you and I, and even the governor proposed to make changes in that law. For example, the governor wants to reduce, as I do, in the second year, the state property tax from $6.60 to $6.10, in my case, $6 in the governor's case. That means we have to get the legislature to amend the statute. Now, I can't guarantee, none of us can, that in every case the legislature will follow my lead. But I'll tell you this, we won't be going around in circles for 4 years if you choose me, Governor. I'm going to offer leadership. I can't guarantee in every case they'll follow my leadership, but I'm going to lead.
You have a follow-up.
Yes, may I follow up?
Yes.
And Senator, if you can't find 13 of the 24 senators, what then will you do?
Well, here's the bottom line that each of us face, whether it's the governor or members of the legislature or the voters and the taxpayers. The legislature has promised more benefits next year than we have the money to fund. That means either we have to scale back our expectations a bit or we have to pay new taxes. I think it's clear where I come down on that issue, and I'm going to be working proactively with the legislature and indeed shaping public opinion, trying to shape public opinion. That's what a leader does in turn to persuade the legislature to follow that leadership. That's my approach. I can't guarantee it'll work in every case, but I guarantee I'm going to try.
Thank you.
Governor Shaheen, it's your turn to ask a question to Ms. Brown.
There are two things that I've accomplished that I'm very proud of: expanding public kindergarten and working to pass the Martin Luther King holiday. I signed both of those bills, and you opposed both of those bills. Senator Brown, can you explain your opposition to public kindergarten and to the Martin Luther King holiday?
Certainly I can, Governor. The kindergarten bill was passed before, as you know, before the Claremont lawsuit came down in '97. And the $30 million that we put in the budget was a budgeted item that wasn't guaranteed. There was no long-term funding for that, no dedicated fund. So my fear, my very real fear, is that that funding would go back to the local property tax instead of being paid by the state into the future. I know what it's like, serving on the Finance Committee, to watch various groups come in every year and vie for the same pot of money. Now, under my plan, I include kindergarten. In fact, I'd like to see communities that want to have all-day kindergarten be able to do that. But the Martin Luther King bill, it's simply a matter of, we have all of our holidays that are generic. They are not named after a person. Labor Day, Veterans Day, and Civil Rights Day. And I just felt that was a New Hampshire way. It wasn't a personal thing.
Would you like to follow up?
Yes,
Go ahead.
please. Wouldn't you agree, though, that public kindergarten has been expanded to 1,800 5-year-olds in 29 different communities, that it's been a huge success, and that we're seeing more communities add public kindergarten each year?
I would say that's true, Governor, and I commend you on that. I just want to make sure we fund it so that it doesn't increase property taxes.
Mr. Babiarz, your turn to ask the governor a question.
Your Excellency, the prior administrations, the Republicans, both governors failed to fully fund Auburn-Blick. You had a chance to fully fund Auburn-Blick with your leadership, but you didn't. So what happens is everybody waited until the last minute, April Fool's Day, 1999, to come up with a solution. Why didn't you press for Auburn-Blick fully funded even further?
Well, the fact is, we did increase funding for foundation aid. At that point, we had a Superior Court ruling on Claremont that ruled in favor of the state. So we worked very hard to try and put additional dollars into education. I did that because I think our schools are so important. The best thing we can give our children is a better education in the future. It's not just critical to our children, it's critical to the future of this state. We're not going to be able to compete in this new global high-tech economy unless we have the best workforce we can provide, and we can't do that unless we give our kids the best education we can provide. That's what I'm committed to doing.
All right, thanks to all in this segment. We're going to move on now. Our next segment includes videotaped questions from citizens around the state of New Hampshire who answered our call for questions in the Union Leader. We will treat them as a toss-up, so the first candidate after the tape plays to raise his or her hand or motion somehow answers first, and then we have 2 minutes for discussion, kind of like school, huh? The first question comes from a man in the Monadnock region. Listen.
I'm Larry Sportello, and my question is, what is your position on the Home Rule Amendment to the Constitution?
Pretty direct and to the point. Ms. Brown was first.
When the Home Rule Amendment came to the Senate, I initially voted against it. People came to me, I guess similar to what they did to you, Gordon, and said they really wanted it, so I made a motion to reconsider and allow it to go out there. My caution is, be careful what you ask for. You may get more than you bargained for. It turns our government upside down, and instead of what's allowed by the legislature, anything that isn't disallowed becomes a local issue. So I just caution people, I'm not planning to vote for it myself.
All right, let's go through. We know we touched on this earlier. Anybody else? Governor?
Yes, I support the home rule amendment. I sponsored it as a state senator. I think if we say we have local control, then it's important for us to act on that, and that we shouldn't be micromanaging what communities want to do. There are plenty of safeguards in place to make sure that all of the boogeymans that people are talking about don't happen. I find it interesting that my opponent, Gordon Humphrey, has flip-flopped on this issue, just as he's flip-flopped on a number of issues in this campaign. And I think it's important for us to give communities the opportunity to set their own destiny.
Mr. Humphrey.
Oh, goodness, Governor. Can't we have an adult debate? I mean, in the last debate, you admitted you were wrong when you voted against lowering the blood alcohol level to 0.08. You voted against it the first time. 2 years later, you voted for it. Great. I admire, you know, your stature, your growth in the intervening 2 years. We're all entitled to change our minds, and I think it's admirable when someone is courageous enough, as I am, to admit that change. This is really silly.
All right. Mr. Babiarz, would you like to speak about home rule?
Definitely. Senator Humphrey, thank you for changing over, because it's a very critical issue. The biggest problem with what this home rule does is, first of all, we have local control now through warrant articles, ordinances that the towns may pass, and zoning. What this does is it gives rights to a legislative body in the first part of our Constitution, which is our Bill of Rights, which is supposed to deal with individual rights. Now that this new legislative body can have rights, the state legislative body, really, once the law is passed by the lower level, because they have rights, the state can't override it. And finally, what's really critical about this thing is there's no oversight. In the state legislative branch, we have the executive, the governor, that can veto any bad legislation. There's no veto here. It passes, and now we're stuck with it.
All right, we have time for one more question and a quick response. This next citizen question comes from someone in the Seacoast. Listen.
I'm Betsy Ward from Exeter, and my question is, what would you do to reduce the size of government in New Hampshire?
Mr. Babiarz, first on the draw.
I would adhere to the Constitution. We have too many departments growing out of bounds. In fact, we have departments that we really don't need. One of the commissions I would eliminate right off is the State Lilac Commission. We don't need it. Second of all, I would eliminate the Aeronautics Board, the Airport Authority that the state has, because the airports are under the control of the federal government. Those are the few that I would do right now.
I didn't know about the Lilac Commission. Senator?
Well, the most important thing I could say in response to the question, how would I reduce the size of government, not to mention the cost, is this. I want to reform education. You know, we talk all the time about funding it, and that's important, but I want to reform it too. I want to thin out that bureaucracy in Concord. I want to reduce the number of rules and regulations on which these bureaucrats thrive, reduce those rules and regulations, reduce the number of bureaus and bureaucrats, and get more of that money, our hard-earned money, down into the classroom and into the paychecks of our teachers.
I got to jump in there because we're running out of time.
Yes.
Governor?
Yes. What I think she's really asking is, how can we make government more efficient? I've done that. We've reduced the cost of workers' compensation. We have an energy conservation program to reduce costs in our buildings, and we're going to save $2 to $4 million a year when that's completed. I've just put out a tri-state purchasing pool for prescription drugs that's going to reduce the cost of medications for our Medicaid population by 10 to 15% a year. This is something that I'm working on a daily basis to make government more efficient for the people it serves.
Okay, I got to jump in. You have a few seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I think we can use technology to enable folks to do things like licensing and renewals that would really make government more efficient. And I think a lot of our commissions, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Lilac Commission is one, are volunteers, so we aren't really incurring a great deal of cost.
All right, we have to scoot. We'll end our debate this evening with one last question, and that is, what is the one thing about your campaign you want the voters to understand? You each have only about 15 seconds for a last shot here. Mr. Humphrey, you're first.
Well, I kept my promises in Washington, ladies and gentlemen. I promised to cast those tough votes and to get spending under control. And today, in small measure, thanks to me, we have surpluses. I promised to save Social Security. Today, it's strong. I promised to protect the environment. Today, we have the cleanest air and water in generations. I keep my promises.
Ms. Brown.
As an independent, I put the welfare and best interests of the citizens of New Hampshire before anything. I have a long-term plan. It solves the problem for the 21st century, and I think New Hampshire will benefit from an independent governor.
Governor.
The choice in this election couldn't be more clear. I want to continue the progress of the last 4 years, expand our prosperity. I'm offering effective, common-sense leadership to keep New Hampshire moving forward. I hope you'll consider voting for me. I ask for your vote and your support.
And Mr. Babiarz.
Libertarians believe in smaller government. If you're tired of sandbox politics, if you want a change, you have to vote for a change. Vote for John Babiarz.
That is all the time we have left this evening. I want to thank all the candidates for being here, along with my colleagues, Allison McNair and Tom Fahey. A programming note before we go, we had hoped to bring you the debates with the candidates from the congressional districts 1 and 2 in New Hampshire. Despite our very best efforts, Congress is still in session and the incumbents are not able to join us. We regret that we cannot host the congressional debates this election. Remember, Election Day is just 1 week away, so please vote. I'm Mike Nikitas from NECN. Good night.
This weekend, it's all politics as C-SPAN takes you on the campaign trail.